Well, hello there, and welcome to day 31 of A Film a Day with me, Jordan Woodley. So, business first. I, 2 days ago, said that as part of my last video of the month, I had tried to stretch myself a bit and do something, a bit different from normal by doing my first YouTube live video. However, men make plans and God laughs. And admittedly, it can also come down to poor planning and time management on my part. Because we got to the point where we were ready to film, at which point we discovered that we wouldn't be able to film using YouTube Live. It's the way. I do want to push myself a bit more. Having a month of sort of this structure of videos has been really good because it's shown myself that I can make this kind of video. But maybe going into next month, I want to stretch myself a little bit in making other kinds of videos and pushing sort of ways that I can make content whilst maintaining the film a day structure. But we'll see. Play by ear. It's an organic process. But today we're going to go back to the same structure as usual. So, as was my intention in terms of real-time broadcasting, I thought a perfect film for that, and last of the month, and a first of Hitchcock, I would do the 1948 film Rope. Hitchcock, I think, if I had been smart, part of me thinks I should have done Citizen Kane as the last of the month, because of how important it is to film history, and I could have then done something once a month, every month that's really important. But because of Mank and the schedule of it, I really wanted to do Citizen Kane last week. So I thought about it. I thought, okay, what film could I do that will be really strong for the end of the month? And I veered away from that and started to think, okay, what filmmaker would be a really strong cap to the month? And it occurred to me, though Orson Welles is a great filmmaker and the grandfather of cinema as we understand it, Hitchcock really is the shaper of contemporary filmmaking. He really did. His breadth of filmmaking and his pushing of the medium and the transitioning of theatre into film, or experimenting with things that couldn't be done in theatre, all the variety of ways that Hitchcock really wanted to push film shaped how filmmakers today make films. He is an auteur in a way that defined his era. Rope is a good first one for me because it does tie into a lot of the things I've been watching over the last month. The real-time aesthetic is a very powerful tool to use, and of course has been used many times throughout cinema. My first encountering of it was with the Michael Keaton film Birdman, which I don't know if it was, but it feels like it was the first film I'd seen that had tried to do the, one, quote-unquote one take, although it's not really one take, but the artificially structured one-take film, real-time structure. And I was very impressed at the time. I remember it's really opened my eyes to that kind of filmmaking. And even then, I could see the joins, I could see how, okay, this is how you transition from scene to scene. This is the interesting ways that the camera is used. And this is, of course, how, it allowed you to focus in on a particular character and actor in a way that a traditional structured film wouldn't be able to do. It's, I really was quite impressed with that type of film, even though it's Birdman demonstrably isn't original in that respect. And then last year, I saw 1917. And 1917 took that and did something extraordinary with it. Using a World War One setting, using the trench landscape, really the structure of using the real-time one-take style of filmmaking is really well suited to something like a war film, where traditionally when you think of war films you think of the action sequences, and you might think of heavy character drama, but you think of, okay, when do we get from one action sequence to the next? But what 1917 did uniquely is it showed the fact that a lot of warfare settings are incredibly bland, slow-paced, and it's not a case that you're constantly in, the setting, the environment around you is the danger, not necessarily the people you're fighting all the time. And I think whereas with Birdman and even with Rope, you can see, as I say, and it may be the fact that I've been in film and TV and that side of things for a long time, but I'm watching these films going, okay, this is where the scene transition is, oh, they've used this technique. Whereas with 1917, because of the nature of it, you don't even consider when these happen. On a second watch, you might be much more obvious, but in the first watch, you just don't think about, oh, this clearly was the point in which they transitioned from scene to scene, and so it really viscerally puts you in the place of a character, and that's really what Rope does. Is Rope makes you the third conspirator in this murder. So, just to summarise, two students whose names are Philip and Brandon they murder their former classmate and put his body into a chest in their apartments with the purely for the intention of carrying out the quote-unquote perfect murder. Now, this was adapted from a play from 1929 by Patrick Hamilton, but it itself is based on the real-life 1924 murder of Bobby Franks by Nathan Leopold and, I forget his first name, but Leopold and Loeb, which was historically an infamous murder of two young men who murdered someone purely to try and carry out the quote-unquote perfect murder. But by doing the real-time structure in the film, it makes you the third conspirator. You walk around the scenario, the space, as if you are a character, and though you're never addressed by the other characters, the fact that you are observing, you will go from conversation, and you may walk away, quote-unquote, from one conversation to a different one, makes you feel like you are physically present in the space and amongst the characters. As I said with The White Tiger, there was something quite conspiratorial about that, and other films that I've mentioned this month, thrillers where you are meant to feel like you are complicit in the events of the film in some way. Even being a passive observer makes you complicit in the crime, and that has an interesting effect on, or should have an interesting effect on, an audience member, because it changes the way they perceive a narrative. Hitchcock infamously was about perception and the ways in which both characters internally and the audience externally change how they react and interact with the narrative that they're engaged with. So the course of the narrative is that, as well as committing this murder, they invite a group of people, which includes the fiancé of the man who's been murdered, the father, the fiancé's former lover, who's also another classmate of theirs, and a man named Rupert, who was a former schoolmaster to all four of the young men. Of course, who is played famously by Jimmy Stewart, who is the most well-known actor of the cast, and of course worked with Hitchcock several times. And of course, as I say, you are now part of this thriller. But whereas traditionally you would be trying to solve the mystery of the thriller, or you're observing the killers, but you don't quite know how they've done it. In this case, you know how they've done it and what they've done and how they've arranged it, and the tension comes in the fact of the discovery. The real-time structure also gives you a sense of micro emotions. So now you're observing characters, particularly our two leads, as they react and interact with people. You see Brendan, who is your more traditional psychopath, and it's another trope of Hitchcock, who had a real interest in the psychopath and the unusual brain of someone who could kill remorselessly, and the fact that he is playing with everyone, very aware of the fact that their victim is in the chest. He allows people who don't know, the rest of the guests who don't know, he plays with them and toys with them in a very cat and mouse sense. Then you have Philip, who is more your murderer, who isn't someone who is a murderer still, but not as much of a psychopath, who you see slowly over the course of the film, the consequences of the murder chip away at his psyche, as he slowly over the course of the film has increasingly a mental breakdown, beginning to suspect who knows and who doesn't, and feeling the weight of his crime and of discovery. And so between the two of them, you're observing, like I said, their micro emotions, particularly with Philip. There's a interrogation scene of sorts between Rupert and Philip. As Philip is playing the piano and Rupert is questioning him, you really get a sense of every line between each exchange of lines between them. You see chip away at Philip, or push or pull, at which point you're seeing Rupert start to unpack the situation around him as he begins to suspect something and he begins to understand that things are amiss. The other thing you also notice is in the setting of it, that you will pay attention to things that you might not necessarily in a traditional drama. You might be looking at other parts of the camera in a way that makes you think, well, if this object is placed in this way, what does that mean? Much more in a theatrical sense. Again, this really feeds on the sense of theatre. As I said with Ma Rainey's Black Bottom, this of course is directly adapted from a stage play, and again it knows the theatrical structuring and the idea that whereas film is focused on directing you at what you need to be seeing and framing things in almost a perfect way for an audience member to assimilate all the information that they need to. The theatrical sense is the idea of setting the space. So you might not always see the information in front of you, but you're always aware that it's there. And in that case, when the camera is panning away from certain objects, you're aware that they are still in the space around you. And of course, when it comes to the climax, where what it boils down to is a three-hander between Philip, Brendan, and Rupert, Jimmy Stewart's character, it becomes this cat and mouse, who's hunting who kind of situation, where at this point Rupert is very aware that something is amiss, and it's now a question of exactly unpiecing everything. But as an audience member, at this point, you're not sure whether you are whether you're wanting on one level wanting it to be unpacked and solved, or whether you want to see it not solved, and the conflicting ideologies of those situations. The only other thing that I can think of that's drew my attention on this first watch of it is the queer coding. So, the two main characters, Brandon and Philip, it is very strongly suggested that there is LGBTQ plus subtext going on between them. And again, this is something Hitchcock was very interested in, and of course we'll go on to things like Strangers on a Train, where, in this case, there's a real sense of choice language that one would traditionally use in subtle queer coding script writing. And again, it changes your perspective of their relationship, and the nature of Brandon and his relationship with everyone around him changes with this reading of the text. So to conclude, really, the thing that I think with Rope is that it's... I was saying this after watching it, that I feel like Rope, and I think I'll get this feeling as I continue to watch the Hitchcock films, the ones I've seen and the ones I haven't. I wonder whether, if you were to transpose the script and the filming style to today, recontextualise the language to more contemporary references, but maintain the body of it, I get the sense that there is its universal relevance to it. And of course, the great filmmakers do that, where a film steps out, you can watch a film and it be as relevant today as it was at the time. And in this case, I do think that Rope is under the category of film which could have the same tensions and the same drama that would appeal to a modern audience member as it would to a contemporary of the film's release. Gus Van Sant, of course, did the 90s remake, shot-for-shot remake of Psycho, and many people have questioned over the years why he would do that, because it's practically pointless. However, I can see the artistry in it, in the idea of wanting to examine the relevance of a narrative now if you were to make it now. And although his choice of the way he did it was odd, I can see the experiment that he was going for, which is very much his desire as a filmmaker, is to experiment in that way. But I can see the relevance of it. So again, no surprise that Hitchcock is a classic and a powerful storyteller, and of course I will continue to delve into him, as I will several of the directors who I've mentioned over the course of the month. It's been a really good first month, so I'll see how things go as we continue through the year. But thanks for joining me. I'll see you again tomorrow. Take care.